Hi, welcome to this channel once again, Excel in Excel. Uh, Today we are going to look into sensitivity analysis of a model that we built in Excel. Now, what is sensitivity analysis? Sensitivity analysis basically allows us to understand how our output or outputs that we have obtained from a model varies with changes in the input. So, practically, we make a model to assist us in a decision. So, for example, I have made a model to help me out in an investment decision. And of course, from the model, I decide that this is the amount I need to invest per month for this amount that I'm expecting, which I'm going to spend on a holiday, let's say. But once I have built up this model, before I start saving the money, I need to figure out how robust is my model. In other words, if there is a small change in the interest rate, will I still be able to manage the outcome amount that I was looking for? And therefore, in a sensitivity analysis, which is also called what if analysis, we would try to figure out if the decision that the model has helped us to arrive at, would it remain same? Would it be affected mildly? Or would it be affected in a very large extent for some changes in some of the input values? So normally, whenever we develop a model, we would love to do a sensitivity analysis so that we can figure out those variables on which the outcome of our model is very, very sensitive to. So while we are looking at the investment decision, for example, there may be so many factors which can affect the outcome. And maybe out of so many factors that can affect the outcome, I might have considered a few of those in my model. And out of the few that I have considered in my model, which are the ones to which my outcome amount is most sensitive on? That means those are the variables that I should keep a close watch on. Now, that's basically the idea of sensitivity analysis. So in Excel, we can do three sensitivity analysis: the goal seek, the data table, or the scenario manager. Uh, of course, this is not the order in which Microsoft has provided them in the menu, but I prefer to have them in this order. So first one, goal seek; second one, data tables; and lastly, scenario manager. One important point to note here is that till now we had been emphasizing on the use of formula and functions in this entire channel. Uh, Today, what we are going to do is a tool. That means we go into a ribbon, we actually go into the data ribbon and select what if analysis and use one of these: goal seek, data tables, or scenario manager. So today we are not talking of a formula per se, beyond of course what is required to build up a model. And to build up the model, we might need any sort of formulas. So let's look into what these are. In goal seek, when do we use goal seek? When we have a function, like if we know the value of x, we can find out the value of y, but we don't have the corresponding function to find out what is the value of x when we know the value of y. Sometime while this can be easy, the reverse one may not be so much of an ease. So in those sort of cases, we use goal seek. And the limitation of goal seek is that we basically look at only one input variable and only one output variable. So if we are looking at a desired value of an output variable, for example, I am looking at a particular return from investment. That means my amount after 5 years or after 10 years should reach a desired value, and I'm looking at what should be the monthly amount that I should save. Now, in that case, we can use a goal seek. Next comes data table. Now, data table can come in two flavors. The first flavor, we call it as one variable data table. In this case, while we are talking of only one input variable, we can have as many output formula that we want to check. So for example, I want to check what is my profit, I want to check what is my revenue, I want to check what is my overhead, I want to check what is my tax liabilities. all based on maybe a particular input value. Let's say the selling price of my product. And therefore, in one variable data table, we, as the name suggests, we vary one variable and we see the corresponding results of multiple outputs. The other flavor is a two variable data table. In two variable data table, we actually see how the output varies depending on multiple input values of two variables. Say I want to see how my profit varies based on the cost and the selling price. So I take different possible values of my cost price, I take different possible values of the selling price, and I see how the profit varies with them. So profit is my output, cost price and selling price are my two inputs. So that is two variable data table. So if you see, moving from goal-seek, in goal-seek we can have only one variable which we are interested in, and we are looking at a desired outcome of a single formula. We can expand that to one variable data table where we can see outcome of many output formula based on the value of, or rather multiple values of a single input variable. We can also extend it to a two variable data table where we can see the output of a single formula based on multiple possible values of up to two variables. But what happens if I need more? If I need to consider more variables, I want to see how three output formula changes based on three different inputs to three different input variables. Now in that case, we can use a scenario manager. And that's why, as I said, the number of variables and number of formula that I can use practically becomes more as we go from goal-seek to data table and to the scenario manager. So the first and foremost, when we do a sensitivity or a what-if analysis, the first and foremost requirement is that we need to develop a model. Once we develop a model, we identify which are the outputs or which is the output that we are interested in. So we might be interested in, for example, only in the final profit, or we might be interested in the profit as well as the revenue as well as the tax. So in step 2, we identify what are the formula or the formulas whose output we are interested in. In step 3, we look at which variables are we talking about, which input variables we are going to vary, which input variables we are interested in. We can run the analysis in step 4. For any sensitivity analysis, we need to have an existing model. So let's talk about a particular scenario here. So let's say I have a house at Indore which is worth about 80 lakh of rupees. Now, if I have to sell this property, I have to take the help of a commission agent, and the standard commission that the commission agent would take is 1.2% of the sale value. Now, why am I planning to sell this house? Because I want to buy another property at Mumbai which cost 2 crores. I would like to finance this 2 crore based on the proceeds of the sale of my Indore property as well as a bank loan, and the bank loan requires me to make a down payment of 15% from my pocket. When I look at this, selling one property to buy another property, I also googled and found out what is the current rate of escalation of property prices, and I found out that it is about 5.1% per annum on the average. And when I approached the bank for a loan to buy my property at Mumbai, I realized that I have to pay an interest rate of 9.6% for the proposed bank loan of 15 years tenure. Now, given that my escalation of the property is only 5.1% and I'm paying a loan at the rate of 9.6%, I believe it makes sense to sell the property outright in Indore and then use that proceed to buy my property and take a loan of the remaining amount to cover up the cost of the property at Mumbai. However, if things were different, for example, if the rate of escalation of the property was higher than the interest rate, then possibly I would not be interested in selling the property of Indore just as yet. In that case, what I would like to do is I would like to take a loan, 2 crore minus the down payment for my Mumbai property, and start servicing the loan once I book the property, and wait till the property price of Indore property rises to a particular value. I propose to figure out what is my outstanding principal of the loan at the end of every year. And during that time, I would also like to see what is the escalated price of my Indore property. So at a point when the property price of the Indore property becomes higher than the outstanding principal, that is the time when I want to sell up the Indore property and close the loan by paying whatever was the outstanding amount plus the interest. If I talk about this scenario to my advisor, I would want my advisor to help me out with a model to figure out that what is the total amount that I would have paid up for buying the Mumbai property, considering whatever I have got from the sale of the Indore property, the down payment that I have made, the total EMIs that I have paid, the interest that I have paid, and so on and so forth. That is the total cost that I would have incurred in owning the Mumbai property. And I would like to see how they vary based on the rate of escalation of my Indore property prices or the rate of interest and so on and so forth. So I have developed the Excel model. So this model basically captures all the inputs that were provided to me. This I have put in green. So we have the price of the house of Indore at 80 lakhs. The price might change plus minus 10%. The escalation rate per annum is 5.1%. And if I sell, the commission that I have to pay to the agent is 1.2%. And therefore, if I sell the property today, I have done the calculation here, I would actually have 79 lakh 4,000 from the proceeds, 96,000 being the commission to the agent. Now, for the Mumbai property, I have to take a loan of 2 crores, minus of course this value. And the duration of the loan was 15 years, rate of interest payable is 9.6%, and of course the down payment requirement is 15%. So therefore, if I sell the house now, as I said, the proceed is 79 lakhs 4,000. So the remaining part of the price of the property from 2 crores, I already have this. So this is the additional amount that I need. And if I am looking at 15% down payment, this is what I need to pay. And therefore, the net loan from the bank that I need now is 1 crore 2 lakhs 81,600. The EMI for which will be 1 lakh roughly 8,000. And I'll pay up this loan in 15 years. And my total outflow would be 2 crore 91 lakhs 55,570. On the other hand, if this price goes beyond the interest rate of 9.6, let's say if it goes 10%, in that case, as you can see, at the end of 6 years, the outstanding principal will become 1 crore 28 lakhs, while the price of the property after 6 years would be 1 crore 40 lakhs. So therefore, that is the time in which I'll sell the property. I'll pay back this 1 lakh 79,000 and whatever. I'll pay this back with interest for a month, and I would have still around 1 lakh 40 minus 1 lakh 28. That would be extra. So at the end of the day, if I am looking at all those, so at a 10, if the house price escalates at 10%, I would end up paying 2 lakh 77,000 something. So now this is a model. As I change, coming back again, if I make it 5.1%, it is 2 lakh 91,000. If I make it 11%, I pay up 263. For example, at 11%, see, I was actually paying up in 6 years, and therefore the difference came in here. But when I make it 12%, I'm actually paying in 5 years, and therefore, as you can see, the property price, the total price has little increased because I did not allow little extra time for my Indore property to escalate further. Now let's do some sensitivity analysis on this particular model. So, the question we are asking now for the sensitivity analysis is that what should be the rate of escalation of the Indore property per annum if I wish to pay only a total of 2 crore 50 lakh for acquisition of the Mumbai property. Now, as you can see, we are very specific about what is the value of the output. In the model that we had created, one of the output was what is the total I end up paying for the Mumbai property. Now, if the total for the Mumbai property I want to pay is 2 crore 50 lakhs, then here the question is, what should be the rate of escalation of the Indore property? Back into the model. What we see now, the way we had made the model, instead of this 5.1%, if I make it 11%, I can see what will be my total outflow to acquire that property. So I can continue changing this X, let's call this as X, the escalation rate of the property, and we'll see how Y changes. That is the total price that I paid for the property. In other words, we have a model where we can figure out Y as a function of X. However, if you can see in this model, we do not have this model telling us what would be the value of X if we change the value of Y. That means I can't change the value here and expect that this value would change, because this is a fixed value and while this is a formula. So in this sort of a cases where I don't have a formula X equal to f of Y, but I have a formula Y equal to f of X that I had explained earlier. That means if I change this, I know how this will change, but I don't know how this will change in case I change this. In that case, we go for a goal seek. Now, one important thing here is this, that while this is basically a small model, certain models can be spanning across workbook. And therefore, in those cases, if you are if you're looking for a particular value of an output and you want to see what should therefore a corresponding input value should be, it's non-trivial. It can be pretty complicated. And therefore, we use a goal seek here. So let's take the goal seek, and we are saying that we want to see what this cell value would be, and what would be, I am sure that is 2 crore 50 lakhs. And how would I get that? I want to change this value. I want to see how this value changes so that I can get the property at 2 crore 50 lakhs. Now, as you can see, it tells me immediately it is 18.78%. So if the property escalation rate is 18.78%, then I should be able to get this at 2 crore 50 lakhs. Now, if I click on OK, these new values will be set in this model. If I cancel, the model will revert back to the previous original values that I had put in. Now, note one thing. What Excel does in goal seek is it does something very idiotic, but it does it very fast. So what it basically did when I put this as 2 crore 50 lakh, what it did was it tried out at 10%, and so no, this value does not match. So it will go to 11% maybe and see, no, this value still doesn't match. Then maybe 12%. This value still is more than 2 crore 50 lakhs. So make it 13%. So what I'm trying to say is that this process continues iteratively till the value is reached. So Excel does not calculate a new formula. It just uses our model and it continues like an idiot changing these values one by one to see how the value here comes down. So as human being, we would have tried to figure out a formula to calculate that, but Excel does not bother to calculate a formula because it can do things fast. It can go on changing these values till the result is reached. However, it's also possible that we may not get the result all the time. For example, let's say I want to set this value to 3 crore 50 lakhs by changing this value, and let's see what happens now. So as you can see, it is continuing, and finally it said that the solution may not have been found. Now here, of course, it will not find a solution, because even if I sell the property outright, right, at 5.1%, if I sell the property outright, my total outgo is only 2 crore 91 lakhs. So therefore, if I am saying that I want this house at 3 crore 50 lakh, it is not possible, because even if I sell the house outright, that is the worst scenario, even in that case, I am only ending up paying 2 crore 91 lakhs. So there can be times when GoalSeek gives a result, and there can be time when GoalSeek does not provide us with a result. So let's be careful to understand that if we are asking the model certain result which is practically not possible, then GoalSeek will not be able to find a result naturally. So we need to be careful about what the GoalSeek tells us. So just before we move on, just wanted to point out one more thing, that when you have a set cell, for example in this B22, and I say that I wanted 2 crore 50 lakhs, please note B22 must be a formula. So the set cell in GoalSeek must be a cell which contains a formula, and this formula must be a function of the changing cell. So when I say changing cell is this, the changing cell, that means in other words, if I change the value of the changing cell, B22 must change. So B22 must be a formula, and that formula must be dependent on B2 in this case. And so let's move on, and let's look at data table. As the name suggests, it needs to be a table. That means it's a combination of rows and columns. You can have as many rows and as many columns depending on your requirement. But note one thing, the green area, which basically is the first column and the first row, is what is under our control. That means any value that we want to put, we can put only in the first row or first column. Now what do we need to put? We need to put the values of the input variable that we are looking at, and the formulas for the outputs that we are looking at. Now all those we can put only in the first row or the first column. The other area, this brownish area, this area is what Excel does to fill up the results for us. That means this is out of bound for us. The brownish area is out of bound for us. Therefore, what happens is, for a one variable data table, I can write the different values of the variable here. For example, if I want to see how different output will change depending on changing values of property escalation rate. In that case, the property escalation rates, like for example 5%, 6%, 8%, 12%, 14%, I'll put in here. And if I want to see how the total cost changes, how many years I need to pay up, what is the escalation of my indoor house, and so on and so forth, I can put all the formulas here. So in this case, in the first column I put the output formula, and in the first row I put the values of the rate of escalation. Or I can do it in another way too. I can just transpose this. In that case, I can put all my variable values in first column, while I can put the formula in the first row. So let's work it out and see how it works. But note that I am limiting myself only to the green region. So let's go back to Excel and see what we are looking at. So let's say what we are looking at is, we are looking at how the some of my outputs get affected by the changes in the rate of property escalation. So the rate of property escalation, let's put it at, let's say 5%, 6%, and let's take few other values. So I'm using the first column in this case. So let's go up to 16, or let's go up to 20%. Okay. And what we want to see is my total payout for my Mumbai property. And so I need to write a formula here. But since I already have the formula here, I'll just refer it to this. So I could have written the formula once again here, but that would be idiotic, because I have already done that job there. So I just refer to that formula. So my total payout will be here. Then let me see how many years I needed. Now the years I needed, I have already computed here, right? Now at that year, what would be my outstanding principal? right? What would be my outstanding principal at that year? I have done that calculation. That's here the outstanding principal. And what would be my Indore property price at that year, which I have again calculated here. So as you can see, here is what I am creating as a data table. Okay, so this is the data table that I am creating, and if I go by the color coding that I had done for in the thing, what I'm doing is, this is my green area, right? This is my green area. So this is the place where I have used up, and this is the area which is left for Excel to fill up. Now, therefore, what now happens is that once we have designed this data table, let's select this table. Okay, let's select this table and let's go into data and select what if analysis data table. Now, whenever you are giving a data table, it asks two questions. It asks what is the row input cell, and it asks what is the column input cell. Now, what do they mean by that? So let's look at it again. This is an important part. This is the place where people get confused. So I repeat again, whenever you had selected the table and you had gone into what if analysis and you selected data table, this dialog box pops up and it asks you what is the row input cell and what is the column input cell. Now, what are they asking? What is Excel asking us? Excel is asking that whatever the input I have given in my row, where in the model those values should be substituted, and same thing for the column. Now, let me make it clear. In this case, in the row, this is the row. In the row, I don't have any input, right? The row is only the output formula, right? In this case, I have given the input only in the first column. What is the input? The input is the rate of escalation, and these are the possible values. So again, we are looking at one variable data table, and what is my variable? The escalation rate of the Indore property. And what are the possible values of that? From 5% to 20% is what I have put in here. Now, since I did not give any input in the row, what I gave are only the output, I'll leave the row input cell blank. So let's come to the column input cell. Now, note it is cell, it is not cells, it is just looking for one cell. Now, what it basically says, all right, Excel tells me, all right, I can see 5%, 6%, 7%, 8%, all these that you had given me as an input. Now, where do I put this value in your model? Now, what are these values? These values are the proposed rate of escalation or the possible rate of escalation of the Indore property. Now, therefore, what is my column input cell? My column input cell is this. Now, what does this mean? It means that what Excel will now do is, this 5% it will substitute here and see how this formula changes. And whatever the formula changes, it will put the value out here. Then it will put 6% into this B2 and then see how this formula changes, how these values changes, and whatever the values are there, it will put in here. So let's do this and see what has happened. Now you see, this is how it has happened. Okay, I think don't worry about this. This is just a matter of formatting. So some of them are showing with rupees, some of them are not showing with rupees. So let's make all of them currency. Now here. So as you can see, what it did, it put 5% in B2 and it checked out what was the value here. Then it checked out what was the value here. Then it checked out what was the value here, and then it copied those values here. Then it did the same thing. It put 6% here and saw how these values changes. And then it copied the values here. Now, same thing it did for 7%, 8%, 9%, 11%. So just to give you an example, let me put here 11%. Now, moment I put the 11%, you see here, it becomes 2 crore 69 lakhs, 6 years. Okay, this should not be rupees. I made a mistake. So that should be only a number, that's all. If I want, I can center that out. Yeah, so that is the number of years. And the outstanding principal became this and the property price became this. Now, these are the values which Excel then copied into here. So look at this. These are exact values what is showing when I had put that 11% out here. So that's how data table works. So whenever you give the row input cell or column input cell, what it does is it basically puts your input values into that in this case the column input cell, that is our B2, and it checks how this output formula value changes. Now whatever the output formula value changes, they copy it here. So for 11%, as you can see, it has copied it here. Now if I make it 12%, assume that Excel is doing the job with me now, and therefore it puts the value 12% here. It sees the formula that it becomes 2,73,105, it becomes 5 years, it becomes 1 crore 37, and it becomes 1 crore 39. So 2 crore 73, 5, 1 crore 37, 1 crore 39. Now these are the values, as you see, it copies in here. Sorry, in this. So 2 crore 73 lakh 73,000 is here, 5 years is here, 1 crore 37 lakh 40,000 is here, 1 crore 39 lakh 29,000 something, it's here. So this process continues repeatedly. Now that is what the data table is. Now at any point of time, if you forgot, for example, what was the row input or column input you had given, now look at the cell. Whenever you look at this cell, it says table comma B2. So table comma B2. First was the row input cell. Comma basically means that we haven't given any row input cell, and the column input cell that we had given was B2, right? So I can't change any single cell here. I can't even delete any single cell here because they are part of the data table. If I have to delete this, I have to select this entire part and then delete. Okay, so that's how one variable data table works. I could have also done it in a different way. For example, I could have written it, as I said, as a transpose. So for example, I could have written 5% here, 6% here, 7% here. For the sake of saving time, let me just take the final payout here, and let's say the number of years here. Or for that matter, okay, let me take what is my outstanding principal here and what is the price of the property here. So I could have also structured my data table like this, okay, and I could have gone into data and selected data table. This time, as you can see, my column are the output and the rows are the input. So in this case, I'll give a row input cell as the property escalation price, and column input cell, because in the column this time I don't have an input, I'll just leave it blank. And therefore, as you can see, these will be the results. So at 5, 6, 7%, naturally, as you can see, these values are blank and therefore they remain blank. And again, it might be just a matter of formatting. So if we make them as rupees, and if we also make this as rupees, the formatting will be better, but that's basically it. The interesting part of a data table is that while we have used a tool, that means we have gone into data ribbon and selected, but it still remains dynamic. So for example, if I make it 5%, 15% and 25%, as you can see, the values have changed. That means once you make a data table, if you change any of the values here, the corresponding data table, the data table will change. Also, let's say you had somehow messed up this model, and after creating the data table, you realize that there is a mistake in this formula. You can correct it out and the correct values will be reflected out here. Now, that's one variable data table. So what did we achieve? What we achieved is, we achieved an insight now that as the rate of escalation of the property of Indore changes, what would be its effect on my decision. So one of the decision was, what is my total payout? Another decision was, in how many years do I pay it up? So as you can see, I can therefore see if for example, the price escalates at 14%, then my total outgo will be around 2 crore 60 lakhs 84,000, and I'll be able to pay back in 5 years, right? So this is what the sensitivity analysis or what if analysis is like. So if you ask the question, what if the property escalates at 14%? I get the answer. What if the property escalates at 20%? I get the answer. So this is a one variable data table. So now let's look how we can use a two variable data table. In a two variable data table, note that we only have the green region where we can put our own values. Now therefore, since I have two variables, I call it variable 1 value 1, variable 1 value 2, variable 1 value 3, variable 1 value 4. Let's say these are the prices of the property. That means my Indore property, I might be able to sell it at 80 lakhs, or maybe I'll be able to sell it at 74 lakhs, 72 lakhs. So what are the possible values in which I'll be able to sell this property? And so property price is one variable here. What is my second variable? Let's say my second variable is let's say the rate of escalation. So it can be 5%, 15%, 25%, 35%, or however we want to put. So therefore, we have put in our input variables in the first row as well as first column. Now the question is, where do we put the formula? You guessed it right, that we have only one cell left of the green region, and therefore only in that place we can possibly put our output formula. And therefore now you realize that if I am taking the advantage of using two variables, I get restricted to only one output formula. So in this case, for example, I can look at what is the total price that I would pay up for the Mumbai property, for various prices at which I can sell the Indore property, and at various rates of escalation of the property price. However, if I also want to know in how many years I will sell up, for example, at this price of the property and at this value of the rate of escalation, in how many years I will actually pay up my loan. Now for that, because one thing you are looking at is the total price, another thing you are looking at is the total number of years, you actually have to make two different tables. Because in one table, moment you put two input variables, you have only one output formula that is possible. So in one variable data table, you take multiple values of a single input variable, but you can check its effect on as many output formula as you wish. However, when you take two input variables and you put their possible values in the rows and columns, you are left with only one cell where you can put the output formula, and therefore you are restricted to checking out with only one output formula. As usual, let's get back into Excel. Now what we are going to do is, we are going to use a two variable. So let's say one variable is the price at which I think I should be able to sell the property. So it may be 75 lakh, or it might be 80 lakhs, or it might be 85 lakhs, or it might be 90 lakhs. Again, let me format it out. Last time we had changed some format, so let's format it out as a rupee. So this is some possible values of the property price at which I should be able to sell the property. On the other hand, this side is the property escalation. So 5%, 6%, and let's take the same value as last time, up to 20%. Now we have the two variable data table. So this side, if I make it a little more clearer, what we have is, we have the Indore property selling price, and in this side what we have is the Indore property price escalation rate. Okay, so let's merge and center. Okay, so let's put it somewhere here and let's wrap the test. So there we are. Now, as we had seen, this is the only cell that we are left with to put any other value in the green region, and therefore let me see what is the total property price that I'll end up paying for these scenarios. And now with this my output formula and this my input values, I select the table. So my data table is selected. I go into the data ribbon, what if analysis, and we take the data table. Now we have both the row input as well as the column input. Now what is the row input? Row input is the property price. Now therefore, where should these values be substituted? These values should be substituted in this place. So the property price in my model was 80 lakh, but what happens if it is 75 lakh? What happens if it is 85 lakhs? What happens if it is 90 lakhs? So that is my row input cell. So my row input cell is B1, and the column input cell like last time is the escalation of rate of my Indore property, which is given here, escalation rate of Indore property per annum. Now once I put this, let's see how the values come in. Now that's the value come in, and again, as I said last time, we had formatted it as numbers. So let's get back into currency. So this is how the price will vary depending on what is my selling price of the Indore property and what is the escalation rate of the Indore property. So this is an example where we have taken two input variables, multiple values of those two input variables, but I am restricted to only one output variable. For example, now if I want to see how many years I will pay it up, I have to create another table like this, and in that table, instead of the total amount that I pay for Mumbai, what I'll be interested in looking at the years. And I told you, since this is dynamic, you see, moment I have changed that to years, and of course they are not rupees anymore, they are actually numbers. So moment I change this out, there is also a number, it's not currency. So moment I change this formula here, as you can see now, it is the number of years in which the loan can be repaid, depending on what the rate of interest is, rate of property escalation price is, and what is the price at which I sell the Indore property. Note one thing, whether we are doing one variable data table or two variable data table, having a data table like this or what we had before when we had the prices, this is not very clear. There are a lot of numbers, but it does not give me a picture of what's happening. I still have to very cautiously look into the numbers, very attentively look at the numbers to understand what the story behind is. So typically what I prefer is, once you have done a data table, there should be a sort of a chart which explains me what's going to happen. So in this case, as you can see, this is the type of total price that I'll end up paying if my rate of interest changes from 5%, rate of escalation of the property changes from 5%, 6%, 7% up to maybe around 14%. So this is how they will vary, and each of these colors tell me what is the selling price of that Indore house. I mean, at what price what is the current price of the Indore house, not the price at which I will ultimately sell, because there is an escalation possible based on these rates. But the current price, if it is 72 lakhs, then this is how this would behave. If the current price is 74 lakhs, then this is how it is going to behave, the orange line, and so on and so forth. So it's always good to give a plot or something which allows me to visualize the trend in the data table better. So data table is a very, very important and common thing that we end up using because, as I just showed you, they are dynamic. That means any value changes, they will change the value dynamically. And so in a model, I can really put in the data table. So for example, if I change this, notice these plots. Now if I, for example, change the rate of interest to, let's say, 12%, the rate of interest for the loan, and you see, now you will see that the plot has changed. So I can have a plot which now depends on the input values here, thanks to the data table that I have used. Now the last of the sensitivity analysis, that is the scenario manager. So you have seen the goal seek, where we basically look at one desired value of an outcome variable, and we want to check what should be the value of the input variable to give us that desirable value of the output. Then we saw one and two variable data table, where we can see the output of one or multiple formula depending on two or one variable, but multiple values of this. But what happens if we have more than that? For example, I want to see how variable 1, variable 2, variable 3, variable 4, the changes on these four variable changes the output formula 1, the output formula 2, the output formula 3, and the output formula 4. So if you want to go beyond the limit of goal seek and data table, you would use something called a scenario manager. However, scenario manager, while it can take as many number of inputs and as many number of outputs, it gets a little restrictive because in this case you have to manually type in the data into the scenario manager dialog box. So let's say we consider these three scenarios: scenario 1, scenario 2, scenario 3. So scenario 1 is a scenario in which I expect that the property escalation will happen at 6.5%. The rate of interest for the loan would be 10% and the tenure of the loan would be 15%. But then there can be another scenario which I can foresee, in which the property escalation can happen at 8.5%. The rate of interest can become 9% for the loan that I would take, and the tenure of the loan is this time curtailed to 12%. And I find another possibility, another reasonable scenario that I can feel is that I have a scenario in which the property escalates at 10.5%, the rate of interest for the loan is at 8.5% per annum, and the tenure is 10 years. Now, these scenarios are something that somebody comes up with one's own domain knowledge, with one's own expertise. So I might have 20 scenarios or I might have 3 scenarios. 20 scenarios is not a very good idea because what happens in this case is that I'll have to physically type in all these scenarios into the scenario manager dialog box. So in data table, I could just put in the data 5%, 6%, 7%, 8%, and I could put in the formula. So as many as I need, I just needed to copy it out, select this out, and run my data table formula or data table tool. But in this case, it is a little more involved. So let's see how we work on it. So let's now look at what happens for those 3 scenarios that we talked about. Now, let's just do one thing. Let's just give a range name to this, and let's say price escalation. So I call this cell, I give a name to this cell as price escalation. And you will see why I have done that. What will be the result, we will see later. Now, what therefore we are looking at here is this. We are going to create a scenario manager. Because why are you creating a scenario manager? Because we have more than 2 variables that we want to check, and we can have as many outputs as I talked about. To do the scenario manager, we go into the data, go into what if analysis, and take the scenario manager. In the scenario manager, what we'll have to do is we'll have to define our scenarios. So let's call this as our scenario 1. And the question is, what are our changing cells? Our changing cells are the input cells that we want to change. So we just talked about our changing cell is the escalation rate. Then we talked about the rate of interest. And we talked about the tenure of the loan. So these are the changing cells. In fact, if we had designed our changing cells properly, for example, they were together, then I could have just selected them as a range. But since they are in separate places, what I'll do is I'll select first the escalation rate, then a comma, then I'm talking about the rate of interest, comma, and then I'm talking of the tenure. Now, so once I had given the changing cells, that means these are the input variables that I am changing. So these are my input cells. Let me click on OK. Now, notice one thing. Since I had given a range name to price escalation, you see I don't get the address, I get the name. So it becomes more English, it becomes easier for me to give the value. So what is my value here? First one was 6.5%. And for this, it was 10%, the rate of interest. And for this, it was 15 years. So the price escalation at 6.5%, the rate of interest for the loan 10%, and the number of years 15%. So I add this. So one is done. Now let's go to scenario 2. So I type in scenario 2. These values are same. My input remains same. So now let's go into this. This time we are saying that the price escalation will be at 8.5%. And we said that the interest rate will be 9%. Sorry, let me put it 9%. And the tenure this time we said will be 12 years. So, and now let's come to scenario 3. So the price escalation this time we said it will be at 10.5%. 10.5%. We said in our second scenario the rate of interest will be 8.5%. And we said the tenure this time will be 10 years. So now once we have done this, right, we have done this. Now we can cancel because we don't have any more. So we had scenario 1, scenario 2 and scenario 3. You can edit them. Now based on this, I want a summary report. The summary report should tell me what would be the total property price for this, how many years in which I would have paid back the money, what is the price at which I sell the Indore properties here, and what is the outstanding principal after so many years it is here. So what I can do is I can put in all the cells where the formula, the output formula are there on which I want to find out what those values would be. So I select all those. Now let me click on OK. And you see I got a scenario summary. Now this scenario summary is a report. In this column, as you can see, it tells me what are the current values. That means what are the values in the model. Now if the price escalation is 6.5%, if the rate of interest is 10%, and if the tenure is 15 years, then I'll end up paying 2 crore 96 lakh in 15 years. And since we are not bothered about selling the property later, we are not bothered about those values here. They are zeros. But if we look at scenario 3, when the price escalation is at 10.5%, rate of interest for the loan taken is 8.5%, and in 10 years, as you can see, I'll end up paying 2 crore 32 lakhs and I'll clear that in 5 years. The price at which I'll sell the property at the end of 5 years is 1 crore 30 lakh 21,000, and the outstanding principal at that point of time will be 1 crore 2 lakhs 73,000. Now if I had given range name for all of them, right, if I had given range name for all these cells, this form would have looked very English. One more thing to note here is that as I select any of these cells here, you don't see any formula. These are all values. In other words, this is not dynamic. That means if I have to change something, for example, I realized I made a mistake here. This should not have been 12%. This should have been 13%. This should not have been 12 years. This should have been 13 years. Now, if I had made that mistake, I want to correct my scenario. In that case, if I change it in the scenario, nothing is going to happen to this report. So how do I do that? I'll have to go back to my model. I'll have to go back to the scenario manager. I take scenario 2, I edit it, okay, and I said it should not be 12 years, maybe it should be 13 years. That was the mistake I made. So instead of 12 years, it should have been actually 13 years. So I make the correction here, click on OK. Other scenarios are fine. So let me go back to summary. I have to create the summary report once again. Okay, I have to create the summary report because the last summary report which I had already had and which is seen here as scenario summary, that would not get updated. So I have to create another summary, and you see I have a scenario summary 2. So in the scenario summary 2, now you see this has become 13 years. But if I go back to my scenario summary, it still shows 12 years. So scenario manager is therefore static. So once you run it, if you change anything in the model, the scenario manager report is not going to change. The scenario summary is not going to change. Therefore, scenario summary is interesting to find out certain outputs, but scenario summary does not become a part of the model. It can surely become an extension of the model. Once you have created a model, you want to see what's the output would be, or how your decision would change based on certain changes in the inputs. You can do a scenario summary, but then you will have to do it manually every time. Goal seek also is something that you have to do manually every time, just like as we had done here before. We put 2 crore 50 lakhs and we saw how this value changes. So if you wanted to see for 2 crore 60 lakhs, you again have to come back to data. You'll again have to go to what if analysis. You again have to select goal seek. Now this puts data table into a different league. When you are using a data table, for example, the one that we had used, and what happens is the data table being formula here, as you can see, it is table B1, B2. It tells us that B1 is the row input cell and B2 is the column input cell. Now, because there is a formula here, if anything changes in the model, they would automatically change. And therefore, if you had made this as a part of the model, they are as dynamic as your model. This brings us to the end of this session, where we talked about the sensitivity analysis or what if analysis. So please note, we have 3: goal seek, data table, and scenario manager. So that will be all for today. Keep learning. Excel in Excel. Till we meet again.